Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to talk about your giftedness. And if you've ever said, I can't stand my job anymore, I'm really trying to figure out where my place is in life, I don't know what God wants me to do, how am I supposed to use my gifts and abilities? This program is for you. I think you are really going to enjoy it. It is based on a new book, The Person Called You: Why You're Here, Why You Matter, What You Should Do with Your Life. And it is written by Bill Hendricks, good friend, has been in this program a number of times with us in the past. He is the president of the Giftedness Center, which is a Dallas-based consulting firm really devoted to helping individuals think through their strategic life and career decisions. He is a graduate of Harvard University, has an English degree, as well as a Master of Science in Mass Communications from Boston University and a Master of Arts in Biblical Studies from Dallas Theological Seminary, serves on a number of boards, and yes, if that last name sounds familiar, the son of Howard Hendricks. And so, Bill Hendricks, we've had you on the program before. This is the first time we've talked about this new book, so it is a delight to have you in studio.
It's great to be back in studio with you, Kerby.
And this is a new studio for you. You've never seen this studio before.
It's a beautiful studio. Very nice. Nicely done.
And I might just mention to our listeners that this today is actually the official launch of the Point of View live broadcast, and this is an opportunity for you to watch us online. We have, of course, been doing this for some time, but we have all the bits and pieces together. We have all of the graphics, and so if you have wanted to watch us in studio, you'll get to see what Bill Hendricks looks like. You'll be able to watch the program, and if you would like to watch it later, you can also watch it at your convenience on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/pointofviewtube. So great opportunities for you to watch or listen to the program, and we're going to spend some time today talking about giftedness. Bill, first of all, you're an incredible writer. I've enjoyed so many of your books, and I have all of them, I believe, on my shelf. And we've had you in the past talking about everything from business ethics to exit interviews, and so many great books that you've put together. But this one really pulls together all the pieces of your life. Because you are one of those 10-talent people. You could have been a film producer and have done video. You certainly could have been an outstanding writer and are. You certainly could have gone into ministry like your family. And in some respects, because of your giftedness, because you have so many gifts and abilities, it probably was a little harder for you to kind of figure out what your future should be.
Well, that's exactly right. There I am at age 30, and my wife decided that it was time for her to stay home and have babies and for me to get out there and earn a living. And people are like, gosh, Bill, you went to Harvard, you've got a couple master's degrees, you can do anything you want. And I'm thinking, well, that may be, but I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I was really lost at that point. And fortunately, somebody introduced me to the process that I now use to ascertain what we call people's giftedness. And having gone through that process, it's like somebody turned a light on. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I understand why I'm here and what I really should be pursuing. And I began to make choices on the basis of that career-wise, that I knew what to move toward and what to stay away from. And then about 20 years ago, just decided, I should reinvent my consulting practice around this whole phenomenon of giftedness. I could help a lot of people, because there's a lot of people that seem to be struggling with the question, what should I do with my life?
I might just mention, I know a number of people that have gone to your actual consulting firm to actually learn a little bit more and to actually go through the giftedness assessment. And one of the things that I think is so helpful is that you've put together this book. It is published by Moody Press. They can look for it in a local bookstore, but we think so highly of it. We've put it in our Point of View store. We also have an article about it, and then we have a web link to the Giftedness Center in case, as we are going through this conversation today, people say, well, I probably couldn't travel to Dallas and be with you. You can still provide coaching and a lot of other great resources. But
That's right.
If you can work your way through this book, you're going to be going... There'll be a lot of aha moments. And I thought it was interesting you started the book by talking about Sherlock Holmes, because you always loved how he would begin to use his mind to think that through. Well, in some respects, you're a little bit like that. You're not discovering a crime, but you're discovering a person's giftedness. And I know many times when you have been talking with someone across the table, all of a sudden the light goes on, and they go, and as you pointed out, sometimes it's staring you right in the face.
Well, that's the thing. Most people don't know what their giftedness is, and the reason is not because they're not bright people or they're not able to be reflective. It's because they live inside their skin.
Yes.
If you live inside your skin, it's a physical impossibility to see your own face, right? You can see every other face in the room, but the one face you cannot see is your own face.
Yes.
Well, by the same token, you live inside your skin, and you'll see other people and their giftedness. But when you're using your giftedness, you're not thinking about using it. You're just using it. And you wouldn't think of doing life any other way. And so it doesn't seem remarkable to you. Even if somebody points it out and says, oh, Kerby, that's amazing what you're able to do. And you're thinking, I don't know, anybody could do that. Because for you, if it's your giftedness, the task is probably relatively easy.
Yeah, it's in your sweet spot.
It's in your sweet spot.
That's right. And it seems to me that sometimes you discover it by someone else telling you this. I've mentioned on this program before an individual that worked at Moody Broadcasting for many years, and one day Wayne had somebody say, you would be really good in radio. And it hadn't really occurred to him. Of course, he's been doing radio ever since for all these different broadcasts. And there is a sense in which you can learn that from other people. But you also, well, in just a few minutes, kind of take us through the process of discovering that.
Right.
But early on, you also talk about Warren Buffett. Let's use him for a good example for just a minute, because everybody knows that Warren Buffett has made so much money by analyzing numbers. And it turns out that when he was a young kid, he was already fascinated by numbers.
Absolutely. He grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and he used to, as a boy, sit on the highway or the street outside of his house, and he would memorize license plate numbers. He just had a fascination with numbers.
Yeah.
In fact, his biographer says that he had a virtual obsession with numbers and how they worked in church. He would take the dates of when the hymn writers were born and when they died, and he would do the math to find out what age they were when they died. He thought that was an important thing to figure out. His favorite toy as a boy was what a lot of people don't know what a money changer is, but it was a money changer, and he would sell packs of gum, and he would sell. He'd buy a 6-pack of Coca-Cola, and for a quarter, and then he'd sell them, at a profit. And this is a 6-year-old kid, and then he goes on to get an education, and he has a mentor, and he apprentices under that mentor for a year or two. And by the age of 22, whatever it was, he goes back to Omaha, and he opens up his investment firm, where he puts in like $100, and everybody else in the family puts in like $5,000. Okay, but he knew how the numbers worked, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now today we look at him and say, "Oh, there's a world-class figure. Wouldn't it be nice to be as brilliant as he is?" But the truth is, Warren simply kept marching in lockstep with his giftedness, and when you do that, things get better and better. There's a sense, and in his case, a literal sense, in which the rich get richer. If you know what your giftedness is, you trust it, you pursue it, you will discover that door after door after door opens, and life gets a lot better.
I might just mention you have stories about Winston Churchill and Warren Buffett and all sorts
Steve
of successful
Jobs.
people, and you see them when they have found their giftedness, but we're going to talk about how they found it and how we can find it if we're still searching. We need to take a break. Continue our conversation with Bill Hendricks right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Well, Over the last few months, I've been doing commentaries on the subject of big data. The enormous amount of digital information has been used by companies to find customers and by the government to find terrorists. But Hollywood has now found an important use for big data. James Herson reports that Google data is now being used by Hollywood executives to predict future box office receipts. By paying attention to search information data, they now claim they have a 94% accuracy in box office predictions. A Google research paper explains that the number of Google and YouTube searches of a movie has the capacity to provide the film industry with a highly accurate predictor mechanism. Will the movie be a blockbuster or a bomb? Find out how many people are searching on the movie title. Of course, it's a bit more complex than that. By analyzing the number of Google searches for a particular movie, predictions on the box office gross can be estimated with approximately 70% accuracy. If you begin to add in the number of search ad clicks, you can improve the accuracy, and Google researchers have built a model that includes search volume and search ad clicks over a 7-day period. This model gave them 92% accuracy. By combining search volume on the movie trailers with other metrics such as the franchise status of the movie and the season of release, they are able to achieve a model with 94% accuracy. It's worth noting that they can make some of these predictions 4 weeks before the release date. Obviously, Hollywood executives are interested in Google models. It should help them predict the success or failure of a film, but it will also give them ability to shape the most effective marketing campaigns for future films. I predict that they will spend more time working the social media sites in hopes of driving potential audiences to film trailers and other marketing aimed at getting them to the movies. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us in studio today Bill Hendricks, and I might just mention once again that you can actually watch the Point of View livecast, and it is on our website, but of course you can also watch it later on our YouTube channel. Bill Hendricks with us. The book is entitled The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do with Your Life. You have a whole section here. What is this thing called giftedness? There are a lot of misconceptions, Bill, so if you can, let's spend a few minutes just talking about what it is and what it isn't in terms of how those gifts can be used in each individual.
Sure. Let me give you a formal definition. Giftedness is the unique way in which you function. It's a set of inborn core strengths and natural motivation that you instinctively use to do things that you find satisfying and productive. Giftedness is not just about what you can do, it's about what you essentially love to do, what you're born to do, and what you do well. Now, all of those words in there have a whole lot of meaning behind them, but I think the key idea here is that every single person does something unique that they were born to do. Giftedness is not so much a psychological thing as it is a behavioral thing. It's a motivational thing. And the one person wants to solve a problem. Never met a problem they didn't want to solve. Somebody else, they want to build something. Somebody else, they want to maintain something. Somebody else, they want to get a response from people. Somebody else wants to understand something at a very deep level. Somebody else wants to reach potential. They want to extract potential, as we would say, like a lot of entrepreneurs. What to you and I looks like a piece of dirt, they can envision the building and the transactions taking place in there and make that all come about.
Sure.
There's all kinds of different expressions of giftedness, and ultimately as many kinds of giftedness as there are people.
You know, you've always heard the phrase natural-born leader.
Yes.
And there is a sense in which that's the case, but also, as I read your book, some of these giftedness develop over time. In other words, we look back and say, oh, he's a natural-born leader, but sometimes there were occasions by which they use their gift, whether it's musical ability, whether it's leadership, whether it's evangelism, whatever it might be. And so there are some situations, and I was expressing to you even off air, how some of us are still discovering some of our gifts in our 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Well, what we're discovering is stuff that was there all along, but opportunity never presented itself.
Very true, yeah.
Like I have a client who's a serial entrepreneur, meaning he started one successful business after another. Well, he grew up his father owned a junkyard in Massachusetts, okay? Doesn't seem like a lot of potential there. But as a little boy, what he discovered was that people would slow down as they passed the junkyard, and he was fascinated with why are they slowing down? And he realized that they were kind of looking for parts, I wonder if they have any. So he got all the hubcaps from all the different cars, and he put them along the fence so that as people slowed down, they could see whether or not you had the hubcap they needed.
Yeah.
They'd stop their car, they'd get out, they'd buy a hubcap, and the business started to prosper as a result. Now, nobody taught him that. It's like Warren Buffett in money and numbers.
Sure.
This young boy, began to express his giftedness at a very early age, but it wasn't until years and years later that he was in any kind of a position to actually start a business.
You know, when you talk about giftedness, it also takes place in a context. Let me use some extreme examples. I've got one friend that in order for her to write, it has to be quiet, actually maybe have classical music, has to really focus, has to have long periods of time where she can actually get in front of a computer and write. Got another friend that as a doctor, the part of his residency that he loved the most was being a trauma care surgeon. He didn't go into that, but he just loved trauma care. And you think of the hecticness of an emergency room and the quietness of the writer. Obviously, those are two extremes, but that giftedness surfaces in certain contexts now, does it not?
Absolutely. It's as if the environment pulls the energy out of us. People are like plants. You can put a plant in certain environments and it'll survive. But if you really want it to thrive, you find the ideal conditions for that environment. And it's the same way with people. Certain people will thrive when they're in that crisis situation like an ER or a trauma surgeon. Other people thrive when they've got complete control over their environment and it's quiet and they're able to pull out the noise and get to work.
So let's, if we can, maybe move to the second part, because I want to go through all of this, and I know we're going to have lots of questions, and people probably going to want to contact you off air. But you have a section here on how do you find your giftedness, and you start that one of those chapters by the truth hidden in plain sight. You talk about one time when you were missing kind of like a briefcase, portfolio.
Oh, yes.
Couldn't find it anywhere in the airport, and you go into lost and found, and you're looking back in the car and everything. It turns out it's right in front of TSA. They'd never noticed it, so you just go in and walk away.
It was right on the TSA desk. It had been sitting there for 20 minutes. The guys had never touched it. They never noticed it.
You never noticed it.
So I just picked it up and
walked out.
And went right on my way.
Sorry, TSA. Sometimes you miss things. But it's a good example that you use of the fact that oftentimes our giftedness is in plain sight.
It's staring us right in the face.
There are ways that we can determine that. And so talk us through just a few of those before we take a break on how any listener, even before he or she reads your book, can discover what are my motivating abilities, what are my giftedness, and how I can best use those for the glory of God.
Well, there's formal and informal ways of assessing that. Quickly, the informal ways, I think most of us are pretty familiar with that. We get feedback from other people.
Right.
Oh, you're really good at that. But then there's also our subjective understanding of what we enjoy doing, what we incline toward. What activities do we keep coming back to again and again and again? Because they're very satisfying. I'm not talking about sitting on the couch eating Cheetos. Yeah, some people come back to that again and again. That's not their giftedness. This is what I'm talking about is a sense of real joy and satisfaction that you gain from a task. Is it working on the car? Is it mowing the lawn? Is it baking biscuits? Is it telling stories to the kids? I mean, everybody has a certain activity that they look on it and think, wow, that's something I really like. I really enjoy that. Now, they may not understand why. That's a different matter. So that's the informal ways.
Yeah.
Now, there's formal ways. People are familiar with Myers-Briggs or DISC or StrengthsFinder is very popular now. There's all kinds of assessment tools out there. they can go a long way toward giving you a somewhat more objective appraisal of your gifts. What we use at the Giftedness Center, though, is not at all a test or an inventory. It's a storytelling process. Right. You tell some stories from your life about activities you've done that you've enjoyed doing and done well. Mm-hmm. And then we do this for you. And in the book, we give you a little guidance for doing it yourself. But you go through those stories, and what you discover is there's a very consistent pattern of behavior.
Right.
You keep coming back to certain things again and again and again, certain interests that, like you always seem to be in your sweet spot when you're working with animals, or in Warren Buffett's case, when he's working with numbers. There's certain abilities that pop up again and again and again. There's the circumstances we just talked about.
Sure.
And if you get to the question, well, what was satisfying about that activity, and you keep track of that, you will discover there's a pattern to what you're saying. As I said, for some people it's solving a problem, for somebody else it's building something, and so forth.
And I've gone through that when I was in my 20s. I remember Carol Thaxton take us through some of that, and I'm familiar with the study. But, the George Barna survey that you quote, 75% of Americans struggle with finding meaning in their lives. So, Bill, it seems to me that even though there are these formal tests and these informal ways, most listeners, even to this broadcast today, are still missing the mark, aren't they?
That's exactly right. And you can back that up with the Gallup study that shows that 70% of American workers are not engaged in their work. 30% are, but that leaves 70%, the vast majority of people, their job is either just a job or worse, I hate my job.
Yeah. And so many people say they hate their job. So maybe when we come back from the break, I want to spend a little bit of time helping people find a little bit more about how to do this. Again, let's just recognize that we aren't going to cover a 230-page book in 1 hour,
No.
although we are giving it an entire hour. You must get real frustrated when you try to do this on a morning talk show where
That's
they give
right.
you 5 minutes. So we're going to certainly encourage you to do that. But one of the other things I would encourage you to do if you are trying to figure out what your giftedness might be, you can go to our website. We have an article there that kind of summarizes the book. We have the book available in our Point of View store, and most importantly, we have under the web links the Giftedness Center link, and you can just simply go to thegiftednesscenter.com. And Bill, as they go there, there's a way to find out about the book, but also to find out about coaching, even if they would not be able to come to your particular facility and get coaching directly, face-to-face. There are other ways in which they can achieve that, right?
Right.
So when we take a break, we're going to come back, and also we'll open up the phones. Perhaps you've been kind of, over the years, trying to figure out, okay, what are my gifts? How am I to bring this together? And in the book, you talk about the fact that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, Psalm 139, and it certainly seems to me that when we see in 1 Corinthians, it talks about different gifts and different abilities, certainly those. Even in the secular world, all sorts of conversations about multiple intelligences and different kinds of educational programs to recognize that one size does not fit all. And I think most importantly, to recognize there'll never be another person like you. Even if you're a twin, your twin is different than you are.
Correct.
Even when you are completely genetically identical, you're different. And so to really be in the process of discovery of who you are, very important issue, and that's why we're talking about it today here on Point of View. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll also open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Just joined us talking about this book, The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, What You Should Do with Your Life. Bill Hendricks in studio with us today as we talk about his book. We'll come back and continue our conversation with him and you right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with us today, Bill Hendricks, as we talk about his book, The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do with Your Life. Let me just mention that certainly this book is ideal for those of you that are trying to figure out where you head in the future. If certainly you're a high school graduate or college graduate, or maybe you've been in a job that doesn't really satisfy you, you're certainly a primary market for this book, and I would encourage you to consider getting a copy. But I also want to speak to those of you that are in some kind of helping profession. Maybe you're a pastor, a Bible study teacher, a counselor, whatever. You are surrounded by people that are really trying to figure out their gifts and their calling. And I really do recommend this book to be on your shelf. If you're going to be an effective pastor, this is going to help you really not only figure out what is happening in your life and what your gifts are. And I've had people like Bill Hybels talk about how he was working outside of his giftedness for years. Well, if a senior pastor at a megachurch is finding that as a problem, I'm sure most other pastors are. But even more importantly, you can help people in your congregation. If somebody is very frustrated in their work, maybe has lost their job, this is a book that is very worthwhile for you. And Bill, actually, you can help people become counselors and mentors.
I call them giftedness coaches. And what I'm hoping is that the very people that you mentioned in the so-called helping professions, or maybe just a person who's in a corporation and sees a younger individual coming up and says they've got promise, but they need some help. You could become a giftedness coach. And what that means is I can take you through some modest orientation and training so that you could use this book as a tool in the life of somebody else and walk with them as they try to figure out what the direction should be for them. Most people are not going to be able to do that on their own. They've got to have a coach of some sort. You could be that person.
You know, when I talked about, you mentioned coach, I used the word mentor, and that just reminded me of something else, because there right now is a tremendous need for more mentors. I meet all sorts of young men that would love to be mentored, but I don't find many mentors. But it brings me back to a structural problem. We seem to be having, Bill, a difficulty of graduating kids from high school and college and then getting them connected with where they should be using their academic training and their giftedness.
It's a huge problem.
There's a structural problem, isn't there?
There's absolutely is a structural systemic problem. I think people assume that if I send my kid off to college is going to help them figure out what to do with their life. The colleges have no vested interest in that. Okay, I'm not knocking colleges. I'm just pointing out that they don't really have a reason why they should help you figure that out. They assume that the parent and the child has figured out what that person's going to do, and now you're accessing the resources of the college to go do that. Well, I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that the vast majority of kids that graduate high school this year have zero clue as to what they really should be doing with their lives. The result is, 2 years, 4 years later, whenever they graduate, of course, if you don't know what you're going to do with your life, you tend to change majors a lot. So now it's 5 years, 6 years, college, whatever.
Very true.
And you graduate, you've got massive student loan debt, and you don't know what to do with your life. Or worse, you get into the job in marketing because you were a marketing major, or sociology because you were a sociology major. And 2 years into that, you go, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. But now what do I do?
Yeah, that's the only degree I've got and the only experience.
We have millions, tens of millions of millennials in that boat right now. I believe that the best way to help a young adult join the world of adults is for an older adult to come and help to, in a sense, sponsor this younger adult into the adult world by treating them like an adult, by listening to them, by treating them with respect, by giving them responsibility, and then by walking with them, by coaching them, by mentoring them into the kinds of things that adults do, one of which, of course, is work. And that's why I promote this idea of giftedness coaching. And you mentioned the website. If people go to the website, there's a link there on Giftedness Coach. Tells you what I'm talking about. There's a little video there to introduce the concept, and I would certainly encourage a lot of listeners who fit that profile to check that out.
Well, again, we have the link to the Giftedness Center, and it's under our web link. And again, we're talking about the book, The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do With Your Life. It's published by Moody Press, and you certainly can find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it available as well. You have a whole section here which we might focus on just for a minute or two. Failure to launch, epic fail factors, ignorance, fear, doubt, pressure, traps, restrictions, fog, isolation. We just talked about that, and this issue of failure to launch is a big one. There have been movies based upon this.
Right.
And at the same time, as you point out, we have this whole generation of millennials right now that are saying, I don't know what I should do with my life, and I'm not so sure whether I have any kind of gifts at all. And I think, if nothing else, what you do through the Giftedness Center help them to come to appreciate the gifts that God has given to them.
Yeah, and that chapter specifically talks about the idea that even if we put you through some kind of a test and figure out, okay, you've got this, profile, or here's your strengths, or whatever it is, people still have a hard time getting out there and using it. There's a failure to launch, and I keep a list of these things, and I've condensed it down to 9 of the big ones in the book. But some people, for instance, it's just sheer fear. Like they don't really trust their gift. They think nobody's going to pay me to do that. My gift is as simple as talking with people and finding something interesting in what they've had to say. Nobody's going to pay me to do that. Well, and whenever I hear that, I say, well, if I can show you that at least one person's getting paid to do that, wouldn't that falsify that assumption? Yes, it would. And then I say, well, Oprah Winfrey's made about $1.5 billion doing precisely that, talking to people and finding something interesting in it. And of course people laugh and say, yeah, but you're cheating. That's kind of one of those world-class people. I said, well, Oprah Winfrey didn't start out world-class. None of us does.
Yeah.
None of us starts out world-class. We're just people, just ordinary, everyday people. If we will discover our gift and begin to trust it and use it and lean into it, as I said earlier, God's working behind the scenes, and all kinds of doors will start to open up.
And as you said, another one is ignorance. And a lot of people simply do not know what their giftedness is. If you were to go out on the street right now, and I think if I'd had more time and energy, I might have done that with a microphone. Do you know what your gifts and abilities are? I'm sure that I'd get kind of the deer in the headlights look, or for those that are a little older might remember the RCA dog, that looked at the gramophone that way. They just go, what? I mean, you're asking questions like you came from another planet, and yet that is key to you being successful.
People have a very rudimentary understanding at best. Kerby, I'm a people person, or I'm pretty good with numbers. Well, that's fine, but that's very rudimentary. They don't have any sort of in-depth awareness of what they actually bring to the party. And even if they have some of that, as I said, they may not really trust that anybody's going to put a value on that, and that they can actually make a living doing that.
Yeah. And sometimes it does take another person. I'll tell another story. Bob Beal one time was talking about when he was with R.C. Sproul. Now, R.C. Sproul's been on this program before, a very gifted individual, and finally, looking through all the things that R.C. Sproul did, he said, really what you are is the holiness of God. And R.C. Sproul, well, I speak on it. No, you don't understand. That is who you are. That is the one that brings the passion out. And of course, out of that, Ligonier then produced a whole series on the holiness of God, and then all sorts of other things came out of that. And certainly Bob Beal has done that, and other people like you with groups like World Vision and Focus on the Family. I mean, these are people that have been very successful in helping kind of clear away the clutter, the fog that you talk about, which is another one of those fears, and really focus on what is the one thing, if you will. What is the sweet spot, whatever illustration you want to use.
Giftedness is what I call the good truth about people. Lord knows there's enough bad truth about any one of us. I find that most people focus on the bad stuff. Yes. They focus on their weaknesses, their failures, their train wrecks, their disappointments, their pathologies, their dysfunctions, whatever. Well, I don't disagree that all that stuff is there and it's true. Look, every one of us needs a Savior. We are sinful, broken people, and without God, there is no salvation. Having said that, there is also a good truth about humans, which rarely gets pointed out. In Psalm 139, you mentioned the phrase David said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Well, when's the last time you got out of bed, as you got out of bed, you thought, I am fearfully and wonderfully made? David wasn't really talking about himself there. He was praising God. He just simply looked at who he was and how God had made him, and he was in awe. He was like, God, I can't believe you made me to be this wonderful person. It's like a college kid that came to see us, and after we kind of showed him what his giftedness was, his mom picked him up, and she said, well, honey, how'd it go? He goes, well, Mom, who wouldn't want to be me?
What a great line.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to tie this into one of the other chapters, and that is calling. We've really talked about this in kind of a secular way. We've mentioned biblical verses a few times, but how does this fit into this biblical concept of calling? How does your giftedness and calling come together? And if you want more information about Bill Hendricks, first of all, let me encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. First article is about the book, kind of giving you a real quick summary, and then the web link to the Giftedness Center. This, I think, has the potential to really revolutionize your life and to make you much more of the kind of person that God wants you to be. We'll talk more with him right after this.
find grace, 'cause you restore my soul. Love and faithfulness, they meet together. Righteousness and peace, they kiss each other. Faithfulness springs up from the earth like a fountain. Righteousness looks down from heaven. Salvation is near for those who fear. Your glory remains. Your goodness lights my way. Salvation is near for those who fear. Your glory remains. Your goodness lights my way. I will make you the place that I go to be safe, 'cause in your heart there I find my sanity. I will make you the place where I go to find grace, 'cause you restore my soul.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Bill Hendricks today as we talk about his book, The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do with Your Life. Bill, a minute ago I talked about the fact that pastors and Bible study leaders and others certainly could use this. It just occurs to me parents are most interested in this because they're trying to figure out what Johnny or Susie needs to do. And a lot of us parents expose them to lots of things, piano lessons and various kinds of martial arts, maybe, and sports and academic programs and all sorts of things. But it seems to me that there's a future book called The Person Called Your Child coming out.
Well, actually, that's probably going to be the title of the next book.
That's really something. And so, again, parents probably even more so. Now, I think a lot of people, when they get older, like those of us around the table, think, well, it's too late. First of all, I want to say it's not too late.
It's never too late to figure out your giftedness.
Some of the most dramatic stories that have been told about artists, painters, and others discovered their gifts very late in life and still were able to use those in effective ways. But certainly I think most parents struggle with, okay, what is maybe the best place for my son or daughter, especially if I'm going to pay an enormous amount of money now to send them off to college.
Right. You really need some idea of what their gifting is long before they get to college, because, again, as I said earlier, the colleges are not going to help them figure that out. I always tell parents, the younger the child particularly, pay attention to the energy. Follow the child's energy. What do they get fascinated with? What holds their attention? What are they bored and suddenly get all excited about in an instant? What are the toys that they keep coming back to and playing with? We talked about the environment earlier, the circumstances. Do they like to be by themselves, or do they have to have other kids around? In fact, if a mom would just start keeping a little journal and you make little observations on a daily basis, today Johnny was fascinated with an ant farm. He spent an hour observing the ants. Okay, just one sentence. But over 12 years or so, you put a whole book together like that, you've now got a lot of data on how this kid inclines.
That's incredible. So again, just some great resources that I really hope that you will take advantage of And I really appreciate you taking the time to write this book because, in a sense, you're sharing some of the trade secrets. You're a little bit like the magician that tells you how the tricks are done, because certainly people have gone to you for years and learned some of this. And certainly this book is a resource for you. And just a minute, I want to come back to talking about how some of our listeners might be able to be giftedness coaches. But I did mention the word calling.
Yes.
Os Guinness talks about that, has written about it. We've talked about calling and gift and calling. How does this all come together? Because we have different gifts and different ministries, different callings. The scriptures speak to that. How does that all interface?
Well, we have a God who wants to express himself in human form. And our God is infinite, so there could be infinite numbers of ways that he expresses himself. Every time he creates a human being, he takes some dimension of himself that he does in an infinite way, and he fashions a person to do that exact same thing, only in a finite way. And so whatever your gifting is, it's at the heart of your personhood, who you are, and every time you live that out, God sees a little picture of himself, and he takes delight in that. So in that sense, we are called to be who God has made us to be. Now, in the New Testament, Ephesians 2:10, it doesn't use the word giftedness, but it uses the word workmanship. That means a made thing, a crafted thing. And the idea there is of an artisan who's putting together a vessel, like a piece of pottery. If the potter fashions that piece one way, it's perfect for holding wine or water. If he fashions it another way, it's perfect for holding bread or grain. If he fashions it yet another way, it's perfect for holding oil and a wick and being a lantern. So the design features give that tool functionality. That's why the verse goes on to say that you are created in Christ Jesus for good works. Well, those aren't just generic good works. Those are specific good works tied to the nature of the workmanship. In other words, if you figure out what your workmanship, your giftedness is, you have a lot of clues as to the good works that God has put together for you. And it says that all of this was prepared in eternity. That from eternity, God looks out in the 21st century. He sees certain good works he wants done. To get them done, he dreams up a person, that person we now call by your name, and at just the right point in time and space, he puts you into the world with your unique giftedness, and you are now the perfect tool to get those works accomplished.
That is so well said. And again, it's just part of what I think is going to be a really encouraging book for you to read, because it talks about your giftedness in your work, your giftedness in relationships, certainly your giftedness in calling. But just before we run out of time, and I wanted to make sure we talked about it again, let's talk about what is available on your website, because I really hope people will not only get this book, but most importantly, that some individuals that maybe are pastors, maybe teachers, Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders,
college
professors, all sorts of individuals that might want to learn a little bit more about how to not only apply it to their lives, but to all the people in their sphere of influence. So talk about what that involves.
Sure. What I do is a lot like fly fishing, okay? Which means, in a sense, anybody could do it. Now, we all know that if we go to Walmart and we buy a fly rod and reel and a fly, and we tie that fly on and throw it in the stream, sooner or later we'll probably catch a fish. But some people develop their skills to a pretty high level of fly fishing. They catch more fish under more conditions, and they have a lot more fun doing it. And they're also able to act as a guide to novice fishermen. Well, I feel like what I'm doing at the Giftedness Center is like a pretty elevated level of fly fishing. We've got a pretty sophisticated process for really pinpointing somebody's giftedness. But it's very labor intensive, it's consultant intensive, and therefore it's very expensive. We've got those services listed on the website, and you'll see the price tags are pretty hefty for most people. So what do I do if I want to get this message out, which of course I do? I say, well, then I need to get more people into fly fishing. And so what I'm interested in doing is arming people who want to help other people with a tool that's really not difficult to use, but it takes some orientation, and arm them with that tool so that they can come alongside somebody and walk with them as they discover the purpose for which God put them here.
Well, it's just an incredible resource, and I hope people will take advantage of that. Now, if people want to meet you face-to-face, they can schedule an appointment too, can't they?
Always glad to give a private lesson, yes. I spend my days in one of two ways. I either am listening to people tell fascinating stories, and I've never heard the same story twice, and then I analyze those stories, and we discover this pattern of behavior that the person has So the other part of my day is in feeding back to people, here's what your giftedness is. It's like holding up the mirror so that they can see themselves. And I will tell you that I do have the best job in the world because I'm like sitting in a lawn chair in the rainforest watching exotic species come by. Mm-hmm. I mean, I never see the same person twice. And every single person, having been made by God, turns out to be this amazing human being. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, do I like everybody that I end up working with? Well, no, not everybody that I work with would I necessarily want to be married to or, be their best friend. I'm still amazed, even in people that I don't feel sort of a chemistry with, I'm still amazed at the uniqueness that they bring to the party.
Yes.
And then to see them light up to that and start to lean into it. And I'll tell you, what gets me out of bed in the morning is when sometimes it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years after I've worked with somebody, and I get a phone call, an email, and they say, Bill, I never thought it could happen to me, but I feel like I'm in the perfect job for me.
You finally found it.
Oh, my gosh. I leap out of bed the next morning to go help the next person because I remember when that person came to see me and they were thinking, there's no hope for me.
Yeah.
And then here comes somebody else who says, well, there's no hope for me. And I go, oh, yes, there is. And I've got all these raving fans of people that have been through the process and really helped them.
A lot of great success stories. So again, just wanted to give you a chance to hear today from Bill Hendricks. The book is, again, entitled The Person Called You, Why You're Here, Why You Matter, and What You Should Do with Your Life. Might also mention that we have a link to the Giftedness Center, and it's just great to have you in the studio. It's a great studio here, and it's also great to have you here for our official launch of the Point of View Livecast. So thank you, Bill, for joining us today.
I'm glad to be the guinea pig.
It was certainly fun. We are going to change topics in the next hour, but I just wanted you to think a little bit more about your gifts, your ability, your calling to be all that you can in Jesus Christ. You can find all sorts of great information about what we're talking about today on our website, pointofview.net. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other topics in the news, but take the time to find out more about the Giftedness Center. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Day 2 love for me stays the same. I'll never stop singing your praise, singing your praise.
I can't stop thinking about you. Jesus, I love you. How I adore you. I can't stop.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking with our good friend Tony Perkins in just a minute. But again, a lot of this has to do with the conversation that we had yesterday of the Hobby Lobby decision. As you well know, the Supreme Court ruled that a closely held corporation like Hobby Lobby was exempt from the Obamacare HHS mandate for abortifacient contraceptives. And we wanted to get some more perspective on that because Tony Perkins not only is the president of the Family Research Council, former member of the Louisiana legislature, but Tony, as I understand, you were with the Hahn family yesterday, and they, of course, are the founders and owners of Conestoga Wood Specialties, which was the other case that was part of that Hobby Lobby Mardell case, wasn't it?
Absolutely, Kerby. I always had the privilege of being with them a number of times, and I was in their offices there in Pennsylvania yesterday morning when the case was handed, the decision in the case was handed down. Obviously, it was very tense going into it. They were waiting, wanting to hear what the news was going to be, and then when the announcement was made that it was a 5-4 decision in favor of the plaintiffs, they were obviously very happy. There were cheers and there was applause. There was about 20 of the family and key staff there in the conference room with us. And then we had a time of prayer, thanking the Lord for this victory that, for now, religious freedom is recognized and protected, but we all know that our religious freedom is just one attack away from yet another executive order that may come down from this president.
You know, one of the people we have on this program every Friday is Kelly Shackelford, and you and Kelly Shackelford have put together a document which we point to quite often on religious hostility in America, just to remind us of that. But staying on that topic for just a minute, the Hahn family, what a key family and a great family, the Green family with Hobby Lobby. This was a great victory for them. And although a lot of people are making a big deal about the fact that it only applies to closely held companies, I think that's significant because these were particular individuals that actually wanted to be in a profit-making entity, but also wanted to retain their religious convictions. And I appreciate what Justice Samuel Alito said, that Congress does not discriminate in this way against men and women who wish to run their businesses as for-profit corporations in a manner required by their religious beliefs. I mean, it is true that corporations are not people, but people run corporations, and those people have religious convictions. And I'm glad that at least we could convince 5 Supreme Court justices that that's the case.
You're absolutely right, Kerby. In the idea that our founders would have ever thought that if you enter the marketplace in a business that you have to somehow leave your religious freedom behind is a foreign concept if you look back at the founders and the views that they held. And so the court essentially said, yeah, if you enter in business and because you take advantage of certain protections or partnerships or whatever avenues that are out there under the law in order to engage in that business, doesn't mean that you have to leave your faith and your convictions behind. So it was a very significant victory on that front. And I think it reinforces the notion that in this country, or this understanding in this country, that we have religious freedom, not the freedom of worship, as the president talked about,
yes.
Which is a truncated view, saying basically you can go to what church you want to or not go to, but don't you dare bring those values outside the doors of the church. Yesterday was a victory for true religious freedom.
Might just mention that we have a link to your website, frc.org, and also the particular press release that you put out there. And I was heartened to see that you were saying it almost the same way I was, because I was saying that this particular case then should send a signal that if indeed a for-profit closely held corporation has religious freedom, then that would certainly apply to Christian colleges like Wheaton College and other ministries like the Little Sisters of the Poor. And you use those examples along with a few others. And it does seem to me that it's a sort of a issue of logic. If indeed a corporation has those rights, by definition, shouldn't the court fairly quickly, and we would even hope the administration, begin to back off on many of these nonprofit groups that you've been working with as well?
I think you're right, but here's a word of caution. I think we should never take anything for granted with the court or in today's world. Religious liberty, as you pointed out earlier in the publication that we put together with Liberty Institute, is really in the crosshairs of the left, because religious freedom, the ability to live out your faith, whether it be in the marketplace, whether it be in the realm of education, or whether it be in public policy, is a hindrance to those who want to radically change this country and make it into something else. And so they understand that in order for them to succeed in advancing an agenda that's primarily right now tied to the homosexual community and their effort to mainstream sexual behavior that is outside of historical acceptability and, of course, certainly biblical acceptability. They're wanting to mainstream that, and with that, they realize they have to remove the freedom of religion. It just has to go in order for them to succeed.
Just before I let you go, I wanted to talk about some of the resources that are available through our listeners through Family Research Council. First of all, we appreciate the various publications that you have, but also I would encourage people to attend the various conferences that you've put together. You've also encouraged people to gather together for prayer, call to fall. Just before I let you go, talk about some of the ways in which our listeners can connect up with you and also, of course, listen to your radio program.
Well, Kerby, I know you have very well-informed and educated listeners because I read a lot of the material that you put out. And what we're trying to do is we equip folks with the information they need to affect real change. And, of course, we're right here in Washington, D.C., so we can get that information out in real time. We have relationships with the policymakers. We influence the policymakers not only with the research that our research staff does, our PhDs and others, but we affect change by tapping into folks across the country who share our values. And so they can participate with us, like in our Values Voter Summit that's coming up September the 26th and 27th.
Mm-hmm.
They can also sign up for my daily update and keep up with what's happening here in Washington, D.C. But the main thing, be informed, pray, and be involved.
Well, I've been to the conference. I certainly get your update every day, and I think yesterday had Richard Land on doing your Washington Watch, and of course, people can have a chance to hear that every day as well. And so we have a link to the Family Research Council. It's frc.org. It is a great resource for you. I encourage you to get their daily emails. All of us around the table read it and use it every day. And Tony, I appreciate the stand that you've taken for life and for family and for liberty, and it's just always a great opportunity to partner with you. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's always a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much. We're
going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other topics, but I did want to give you a chance to hear a little bit more about that decision that came down on the Hobby Lobby Mardell Conestoga case, and it's an important case that you need to know more about. So again, take the time to read some of the things that we have posted on our website, some of the articles. We have a book also that we've talked about in the first hour. Of course, we have some of the articles and web links, and it's all available at the website pointofview.net. As you go there, you might also click on that button that says donate if you can help us out financially. We would greatly appreciate that. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how Christians can think about literature. We bring back to the microphone Dr. Don Williams. He's been with us before, and we'll talk about how literature and the movies and imagination certainly needs to be captured by Christians. We'll talk with him and you right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few months, I've been doing commentaries on the subject of big data. The enormous amount of digital information has been used by companies to find customers and by the government to find terrorists. But Hollywood has now found an important use for big data. James Herson reports that Google data is now being used by Hollywood executives to predict future box office receipts. By paying attention to search information data, they now claim they have a 94% accuracy in box office predictions. A Google research paper explains that the number of Google and YouTube searches of a movie has the capacity to provide the film industry with a highly accurate predictor mechanism. Will the movie be a blockbuster or a bomb? Find out how many people are searching on the movie title. Of course, it's a bit more complex than that. By analyzing the number of Google searches for a particular movie, predictions on the box office gross can be estimated with approximately 70% accuracy. If you begin to add in the number of search ad clicks, you can improve the accuracy, and Google researchers have built a model that includes search volume and search ad clicks over a 7-day period. This model gave them 92% accuracy. By combining search volume on the movie trailers with other metrics such as the franchise status of the movie and the season of release, they are able to achieve a model with 94% accuracy. It's worth noting that they can make some of these predictions 4 weeks before the release date. Obviously, Hollywood executives are interested in Google models. It should help them predict the success or failure of a film, but it will also give them ability to shape the most effective marketing campaigns for future films. I predict that they will spend more time working the social media sites in hopes of driving potential audiences to film trailers and other marketing aimed at getting them to the movies. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us by phone now Dr. Don Williams, and he is an individual that has been on the program with us before. Really quite an expert as a professor of English and literature, but also the incoming president and now serving as president of the International Society of Christian Apologetics. Really devoted his life to Christ at an early age and certainly had a real interest in the integration of faith and learning. Holds a bachelor's degree in English from Taylor University, an MDiv from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and a PhD in medieval and Renaissance literature from the University of Georgia. He is a professor at Toccoa Falls College, and certainly is an individual that not only is in the classroom, but as well, Don, I know that you've traveled to, more recently, India and other parts of the country and the world to promote ideas of apologetic theology and literature. So it's great to have you back on the program with us today.
That's right. It's good to be back, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk a little bit about literature. You know, it's during the summer months. This is a great time to get your kids reading good literature. And I know that as an English professor, you would love to have students that come in that have actually read some of the great works and are understanding literature. This is a culture that unfortunately isn't emphasizing reading like it did in the past. But what would you suggest for parents, especially out there right now, but even for themselves, in terms of reading and understanding the value of the literary works of the Western world?
Well, the Christian parents I know are already mostly doing the right thing, and that is you start reading to your kids when they're little, before they can even read for themselves. I have two sisters who both taught elementary school, and they tell me that they can spot on the first day of class infallibly which children were read to by their parents when they were little and which were not.
Wow.
That is the biggest indicator of future academic success, because in those early years, if you're hearing the cadences as well as the meaning of the stories and learning to enjoy that kind of thing, it forms the mind in ways that we probably don't even understand. And then as they are old enough, introduce them, of course, to the Narnia books,
Mm-hmm.
then later to The Hobbit, and later still to The Lord of the Rings. And the other good literature of the past, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, are books that I enjoyed very much when I was very small. Treasure Island. And this will prepare them. They won't all become English majors, thank God. But they will be able to handle texts, whether it's of literature for enjoyment or other kinds of texts, will be part of their world. And nowadays, if we don't do this, it won't happen, because they'll just spend all of their time with electronic media and video games and those kind of things.
Yeah, and we've sort of lost that whole corpus of knowledge. I mean, when Shakespeare would quote, or people would quote Shakespeare later on, you would understand that because you had an understanding of the Bible, you'd have an understanding of some of the basic works of Western literature, and that is certainly not the case now. I might just mention along the way that you are the author of 9 books, and one that I certainly would recommend. It sort of relates to what we just talked about, your book, Mere Humanity, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien on the human condition. Of course, you have quite a number of others, but since we mentioned C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, that certainly fits the case. Also, Gaining the Faith, the romanticism of C.S. Lewis, just a number of things that you've written over the years. So I hope people will find out a little bit more about what you are doing. And while we are talking about that, answer the question we get from some Christians who say, well, I'll just read the Bible. I'll read nonfiction. Why would I want to read stories about things that never existed? Why would I want to read fiction? Answer that question. I'm sure it's a question you've had from students, maybe not in classes where they're English majors, but certainly others that say, why do you spend so much time talking about Christian fiction or fiction in general or the imagination? Speak to that issue if you might.
If you're going to eliminate from your reading all stories about things that never happened, then you're going to have to cut all the parables out of the New Testament.
Good line.
Because the parables are stories that Jesus made up. And usually by looking how they come in the narrative in context, you can tell he's making them up on the spot. Somebody will say, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus' response is, well, let me tell you a story. There was this guy on the way to Jericho, And so the Scripture isn't saying there was an actual guy who got mugged on the road to Jericho. Jesus is telling a story that he made up to get across his point about what a true neighbor is. And this is something that goes much further back to the Old Testament, of course, when you have David in his affair with Bathsheba, and he was confronted by Nathan the prophet.
I was thinking of Nathan. Yes, go ahead.
And Nathan comes in and tells this story about this guy who had this little sheep, this lamb, and it was, stolen by the neighbor, and David gets all upset. And then Nathan says, thou art the man. Clearly, Nathan's story about the sheep is not a literal historical story about an actual neighbor and an actual lamb. It's something he told to get past David's guard so that David would realize what he himself had done by seeing the same story told in different terms. So if we're going to eliminate fiction from our lives, then we will have to cut out part of Scripture, and we will not be following the example of the biblical writers or of Jesus himself, who not only used stories but made them up. Jesus was, even if you forget completely about his divinity or even his religious significance, from a purely literary standpoint, Jesus was the greatest composer of parables in the history of the world.
Good example. And again, I think it illustrates, we're talking with Don Williams, but it again illustrates, Don, the power of fiction, the power of story. It sort of bypasses your logical faculties, and that's the example I was going to use, that Nathan, if he were to confront David, probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere, but by telling the story first and getting David's emotions aroused, that then the conviction took place. So there is certainly a tremendous power in story, and certainly any pastor worth his ability knows that in addition to giving scriptural principles, you want to give illustrations of some sort, because oftentimes, sadly to say, because you preach, I teach, we sometimes recognize that after the fact, the people remember our stories better than they remember some of the points of our sermon, right?
Yes, they do. I wouldn't say that fiction bypasses logic necessarily. I think good fiction has to...
It has to be logical, true.
Has to be logical.
Yeah.
But it bypasses, it gets past our guard that we have up.
Yeah.
And by engaging the emotions, and hopefully enables us then to see what our emotions have kept us from seeing, which is quite logical. And I ask myself the question then, okay, if Jesus used parables, if Jesus used fiction as central to his teaching, why did he do that? Why has fiction been an important part of every human culture in the history of the world? And I think Tolkien gives the answer to that question in his essay on fairy stories. I deal with this in Mere Humanity, where Tolkien says, why are human beings creative? And his answer is, we're creative because we're created in the image of the Creator. So think about what happened when God created the world. He creates an environment. He writes the rules for that environment. That is, the laws of science, the laws of chemistry, the laws of physics, that will determine how it's going to operate. Into that environment, he puts significant characters, Adam and Eve, whose choices create a story that has a plot that gives meaning to that whole world. And so when a human author writes a story, he's really doing the same thing on his own level. You create a setting, you create an environment, you get to write the rules. They can be the same as the rules of the real world, or you can make them slightly different. You can make a world in which warp speed is possible. You can make a world in which magic works if you want to. But you have to be consistent with those rules once you set them up. And then into that world you put characters who have to interact. And in any plot that anybody ever wants to read, the story always ends up being a conflict between good and evil, between darkness and light. And so the reason that fiction is such a powerful way to reach human beings is that it speaks to who we are as creatures made in the image of God. Every time we open our mouths, we prove we were made in the image of God.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of these youth novels and how do we think about that. Much more coming up right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation today as we talk about reading and literature, we certainly would welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Sort of been Humanities Day. We had Bill Hendricks with us the first hour. He had an English degree from Harvard University, and we, of course, are talking at the moment with Don Williams, who is the Forrest Scholar and Professor of English at Toccoa Falls College and has an English degree. My producer has an English degree, so lots of conversation today about this. But Don, for just a minute, I thought we might talk about these youth, young adult kind of trends. You've got the Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Twilight, Divergent kinds of first books. Then a lot of them are turned into movies. And it seems to me that this is a question that is facing a lot more Christian parents today. Do I let my kids read? I'd rather they would read than sit in front of a TV screen or play a video game. But, what about some of the themes? I'd love to get your thoughts about how, as a Christian, we should exercise discernment in terms of some of these very popular books that are now being turned into movies.
Well, I do think you have to exercise discernment, and I think you have to do that even with something as seemingly safe as the Narnia books, which are a great set of books that have caused many people to come to Christ. And yet, in the last battle, for example, you have a character who seems to be promoting the idea of inclusivism, which I think biblically is a very problematic point of view. This character, Emeth, who ends up getting saved even though he doesn't know or serve Aslan in this life. So I think even with something as good and positive as the Narnia books, we need not to just turn our kids loose to read them, but we need to read what they're reading and be able to discuss it with them and guide them in learning discernment. The parents need to practice discernment, and discernment is what they need to be modeling for their kids and teaching their kids. So that would be everything from enthusiasm from the Narnia books to there might be other things that you would decide are not appropriate for your kids to be reading when they're young until they have reached a level where they can use some of that discernment themselves. You know, in general, I'm not one of these guys that wants to draw up a list of books that Christians shouldn't be reading. I think we should be knowledgeable about what's out there and about what the world is doing. But I think we need to have our minds and our hearts formed by what is good so that we're prepared to begin doing that. And very young children, of course, aren't ready for that kind of discernment yet.
Sure.
Now, I'm not an expert in young adult literature. I mean, I teach Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales.
I understand.
Shakespeare and Milton. And I haven't read the Twilight series. Based on what my students tell me, most of my discerning Christian students have had a very negative reaction to that thing. They don't think it's good literature.
Right. I've heard people say that. Yeah.
Much less something that Christians would be interested in from any other perspective. Harry Potter, I have read those, and they do have literary value, and I would say they're not advertisements for Vika, which some people accuse them of being. On the other hand, they're not the Christian successors to the Narnia series that some enthusiasts in the church have claimed that they are either. They are they give you a clear division between good and evil, but I think there is some confusion theologically in them that I would let my kids read them, but not until they were older and had shown some ability to read with discernment. And then, as always, I think their parents need to be involved along with them to know what they're being exposed to and be able to discuss it with them.
Let's take some phone calls along the way. I'd love to get your comments. Talking with Don Williams today. We'll go to Ruth in the state of Texas. You're on. Thank you for joining us. What would you like to share with us?
Well, I just, all the talk about all these the Christian literature and Narnia and all that kind of stuff, it makes me think about, the Tower of Babel, where, they were doing what they were doing, what God scattered the people. He said, we've got to come down there and scatter them because in their imagination, they'll be able to come up with all kinds of stuff. And he was talking about the evil that those people were doing. And it kind of makes me think about these books coming out that basically they make half man, half beast, or these beasts, these children are the good guys helping them out. I believe those are just wrong and evil for letting our kids read them, and then trying to say, well, there's a Christian story to this. Well, the Bible says there's demons and there's good, there's demons, and we've got to don't steer your kids towards, hey, these are good creatures. And I think it's just, it's not good for our kids.
Sure. Well, whether you're talking about vampires or ape-human hybrids or, chimeras or all sorts of different things, there are some really bizarre kinds of imagery out there today, Don. And again, I think it brings us back to maybe the key verse to this broadcast is Philippians 4:8. We should focus on those things which are true and lovely and pure, and the whole list. And when there's so much good literature, why read questionable literature is kind of my argument. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there is. I think there's a distinction. There's more than just good versus questionable. There's things that you're not quite sure which they are. There's that which we know is good, which has proved itself over time. And that's what we should be feeding our minds on. And then there are books that I feed my mind on. There are other books that I read because I need to know what's in them. And maybe not every Christian needs to be reading them, but because I'm a professor of literature and I'm someone who's looked to for guidance, I need to be able to know what's there. And then there are other books that I just don't even need to be exposed to.
Right.
And developing discernment is part of the process, and it's not a part that we can skip. And we're talking about reading literature, but in the midst of talking about that, let's not forget the importance of the Bible as the foundation for everything. My grandfather was an illiterate farmer, but he loved the Bible. He couldn't even read. But when he came in from the fields at the end of the day, he would always end his day with one of his children sitting in his lap reading to him from the King James Bible.
Wow.
His son, my father, picked up that love for the Bible. He had a high school education, was an airplane mechanic, who read his own Bible every day. And I have a Ph.D. and have taught the Bible on 5 continents and have my devotions in the Greek New Testament. Now, that's not because I've risen above them. It's because I haven't completely wasted the legacy that they gave me.
Well said.
And when I think about that story, I think about my grandfather and the impact he has had on the world because his love of the biblical text when he couldn't even read it for himself. And that inspires me. So I fill my mind with the scriptures, and I fill it with the books that have stood the test of time and proved themselves to be wholesome and worthy of our contemplation. Books like Pilgrim's Progress, for example.
John Bunyan.
The old classics, but even though it was 17th century, it's written so well that the English flows very easily, even for modern readers. That's a book every Christian ought to have read and reread. You'll learn more good theology from Pilgrim's Progress than you will from any book of systematic theology, even one of mine.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'll talk a little bit more. Your warning, too, is a good one. Even tomorrow, we got Ron Rhodes in studio, and because he does read in the occult, because he writes on that, his wife always has said, I want you to read 2 good books before you read one of these bad books, and there's a wisdom in that as well. And I would say that there are a lot of us that should stay away from certain movies, certain books, but there is maybe a ministry for a very select few. We'll come back and maybe we can compose a little bit of a list of books you should be reading. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Don Williams right after this.
You took the blame. You were rejected time and again. You loved your accusers the same as a friend. I wanna love the way you love, 'cause without love I am nothing, and I wanna love the way you love, 'cause without love I am nothing. You were beaten, you were betrayed without a reason. You took the blame. You were rejected time and again. You loved your accusers the same as a friend. I wanna love the way you love, 'cause you are love. You are everything. I wanna love the way you love, 'cause you are love. You are everything. This is how I know love.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Don Williams, and if you'd like to join our conversation, we might get time for another phone call real quickly. 1-800-351-1212. You know, Don, you said I'm not making a list of books not to read, but there have been a lot of people over the years that have made lists of books they should read, and if you do a Google search, like type in books Christians should read, which I did just a minute ago, you've got ones from Goodreads and Christianity Today and Crosswalk.com and all sorts of others, different lists of books, sometimes 10, sometimes 25, sometimes 50 books, some of them that are helpful in terms of your spiritual life, some in terms of being able to answer questions that people have, some are spiritual classics. Whatever list you use, and I know our own ministry, Pro Ministries, had a list. I know Christian schools oftentimes create them. James Sire of InterVarsity Press had created a list. It seems to me that, as I said before, there are so many really good books out there, some that will really help nurture your soul and your spiritual growth. I'd really want to focus my time on those books rather than some of these others that are not good literature. They have questionable content because you only have so much time, and you might as well feed your mind with the best that you can find.
That's right. You're going to feed your mind on the Bible and the best of the Christian and secular classics. And if you do that, then when you get exposed to other things, which is going to happen, you can't isolate yourself from it. You may flip past it on television. It may be something that somebody that's influencing somebody that you love, and so you read it just because you need to know what they're talking about. If you fill your mind with the Bible and nurture it and structure it with the Bible and the classics, then it will respond correctly to the rest. But it needs to be rooted and grounded in the best that God has given us, starting with the Scriptures themselves. Let me mention just one of my books that we haven't mentioned yet, and it's actually the one that's probably the most directly related
Perfect.
to our conversation today, and that is Inklings of Reality.
Oh, sure.
Essays Toward a Christian Philosophy of Letters. That is, this is a book about the place of reading in the Christian life, why Christians should read, how Christians should read, what Christians should read. And in the second edition, which is from Lantern Hollow Press, there are appendices that give lists like you're talking about that will be very helpful to homeschooling parents or upper-level Christian students, high school and college students of literature. So I would highly recommend Inklings of Reality if you're interested in this topic. And it contains my list of essential books. And we don't have time to go into all of them, but I would say start with Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, because that is the fountain of Western literature. Everybody else refers back to that. And up until modern times, everybody else assumed that you'd already read that. The Scriptures, Augustine's Confessions.
Yes.
We talked about Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. And then Shakespeare, when you're old enough for that, and I started Shakespeare when I was just in junior high. Most people get their first exposure there. It's go for the good stuff.
Sure. Again, Inklings of Reality, Essays Towards a Christian Philosophy of Letters, Lantern Hollow Press, and second edition out. Let's take another phone call. We'll go to Matthew. You're on with Dr. Don Williams.
Hey, Don. I'd just like to first thank you for the show. I always listen to it on my way to work, and it's very enriching and a blessing.
Very good. Thank you.
I had a comment about Christians reading different types of fiction. I just wanted to make the comment that I have a friend in college right now, and she grew up on the Harry Potter edition books, and I did not. I wasn't interested in that kind of thing when I was a kid. But when she went to college, and of course she's a Christian, she started almost a fraternity. Well, it's not a fraternity, a group, and they play Quidditch, which is a sport in the book, and she is able to relate to lost people with these books because she is a Christian, and it's a place I would not be able to relate to them because I haven't read the books myself. And she has a biblical worldview, and she's able to hang out with these people that I would have no relationship because I haven't read the books. So I thought I would just make that comment.
Amen. I'm glad to hear about her, and you have perhaps a different calling. I hope there are some people that you can relate to as well.
Matthew,
All right.
appreciate your phone call, and keep listening.
All right.
We're just about out of time, and I thought for just a few minutes, Don, let's talk about, one, how people, if they are interested in some of the books we've mentioned, of course, we've talked about Inklings of Reality, and I mentioned, of course, a couple of others like Mere Humanity, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien, how they can contact you, because they might certainly be able to find them on the website, but I thought I would also let people know how they can contact you directly.
Yes, my email address is DTW, that's for Donald T. Williams, DTW at TFC, that's short for Toccoa Falls College, .edu, which is education. DTW at TFC.edu, and I'd be pleased to hear from you by email. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me there, and would love to hear from you if you have further questions.
The other thought is that we might have some young people that are thinking about college, either in the fall or maybe they're juniors thinking about a year from now. Toccoa Falls is something you've really encouraged young people to consider, and especially if they would like to go into the field of English and literature and study under you. Tell us a little bit more about that college there in the hills of northeast Georgia.
That's right. We're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's beautiful. We've got a 186-foot high waterfall in the middle of our campus. And it's a small Christian college, about 800 students. historically close ties to the Christian Missionary Alliance, but we are independent, non-denominational. And I would really strongly encourage you, especially if you're interested in English, to think about a school like Toccoa Falls, because in the secular universities, the English departments are very frequently the most hostile department on campus for conservative Christians. Not only that, but their approach to teaching English, you would not recognize any of the things that people who want to be an English major value English for in the way it's taught there. So that's a field in which I think it's especially important to get a good biblical grounding if you're going to go into it academically.
I mentioned that Don Williams not only is a professor of English at Toccoa Falls College, but also the president now of the International Society of Christian Apologetics. We'll be having our Apologetics Conference next April at Southern Evangelical Seminary. We'll have you back in to talk about that. But I thought as we came into the summer and encourage people to read, that you might give us some good direction on books to read. And it's been a great opportunity to once again talk about Christian imagination and evaluate these issues. So, Don, thank you for joining us. Let's do it again sometime.
My pleasure. Can't wait.
We will take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, I've already sort of given you a little bit of a hint about what we will be talking about, because we have an opportunity to have in studio with us Ron Rhodes, and we'll be talking about some of the issues that he has been studying, and in particular look at some of these out-of-body experiences and how do we think about what happens after death. And that will be the conversation in the second hour. Melanie Kirkpatrick will be with us in the first hour as we're going to talk about what's been happening in North Korea. So I think you will appreciate the conversation with both of those individuals. And throughout the week, we'll be talking with various newsmakers and experts. And, of course, encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. There's a place for you to watch the program again if you'd like to. It is a place for you to find out about some of the books we've mentioned, in particular the one we talked about in the first hour, The Person Called You. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. And if you can click on that button to send a donation, we would appreciate that as well. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.